Good day and welcome to AMR Talk Namibia. This is a segment where we discuss antimicrobial resistance from the context of One Health. One Health is a holistic approach that promotes human health, environmental health, as well as animal health, all holistically within the context of Namibia. So this segment is proudly brought to you by a close collaboration between Agribank, the Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform, as well as the Federal Research Institute for Animal Health in Germany under a project called the Global Health Protection Program. I'll be your host, Elio Wanga. I am a medical laboratory scientist, currently working in project coordination under the Global Health Protection Program, and I'm also an AMR Youth Ambassador for the Students Against Superbugs Africa initiative. I'm joined here by a veterinary based at the Central Veterinary Laboratory, Dr. Lee Monique. She is based in the Clinical Microbiology Department of the laboratory, and she's also the national focal point responsible for antimicrobial resistance at the Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform. Welcome, Dr. Lee Monique.
Thank you. Good morning, Ellie. I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss this very important topic with our farmers, which is antimicrobial resistance. So again, I'm happy to be here and for us to discuss today.
Okay, Dr. Lee Monique, let's start with the basics. So I believe when defining antimicrobial resistance, it's important for us to define what antibiotics are. I believe our farmers are familiar with antibiotics. Most of them use antibiotics, but there might be some confusion. So can you please define antibiotics and give us a differentiation between antibiotics and other medications, for example, vaccines?
Okay. So antibiotics basically are medicines that are produced and used to either kill or to stop bacteria from multiplying, and that is how they survive in a body. So it basically kills them or it stops them from multiplying. And there is some sort of confusion between antibiotics and vaccines when it comes to farmers. So maybe just to put it in basic terms, your antibiotic would be something that you would use to treat an animal that is sick, and specifically sick because it has a bacterial infection. So if it is sick because it was caused because of a bacteria, you would revert to your antibiotics. Whereas a vaccine, on the other hand, is something that you would administer to a healthy animal. So you do not administer vaccines to sick animals, and you do not administer your antibiotics to healthy animals. So what the vaccine does, the vaccine helps the animal or the person's body to build up defenses to make it more capable of fighting an infection when the infection does come. So yeah, I hope that makes it a bit clear. So again, just to repeat and to emphasize, an antibiotic is what you would give to an animal when it's sick, and it's sick because it was caused by a bacteria, whereas a vaccine is what you would give to a healthy animal to prevent infection, and a vaccine can be used against infections for viruses or caused by viruses, bacteria, etc.
Okay, so again, we've elaborated. The takeaway point is that we don't give antibiotics to our animals when they are not sick. Okay, great. So let's dive into antimicrobial resistance. So could you define antimicrobial resistance for us and tell us why should it be a concern to our Namibian farmers?
Okay. So antimicrobial resistance, maybe just to give a briefing of what antimicrobials are. Antimicrobials are medications that you would give to work on an infection that was caused by any microbe, and in simple terms a microbe would be a bacteria or a virus or some sort of germ, as a kid would call it. So that is an antimicrobial, and in this big group we have the antibiotics. So the antibiotics are meant to fight, like I said previously, it's meant to either kill or to stop the bacteria from multiplying itself within the body to allow or to cause the animal to become sick. When there's antimicrobial resistance or antibiotic resistance specifically, the bacteria which we intend to kill has built up a resistance mechanism that allows them to bypass what the antibiotic was intended to do. So this bacteria can then thrive and be there and still cause infection in the animals despite the usage of antibiotics. I hope that makes sense in simple terms.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that due to antimicrobial resistance, we can have our common infections in our animals, like our bacterial infections in this case, continue to persist even though we're treating them with antibiotics. And ultimately, we're saying that these bacteria continue to survive despite being treated over long periods of time.
Exactly. A simple example would also just be if in the past, I think our farmers are quite familiar with pasteurellosis. So they have pasteurella in the farm. In the past, they used to use a specific antibiotic for that, for those cases. It worked perfectly fine, but 2 years or 3 years from now, they could be dealing with the same infection, and that very same antibiotic would not work, and they would not understand why. And that is where the explanation of antimicrobial resistance comes in. It means those bacteria that cause the very same pasteurella built up the resistance, and so that antibiotic will no longer be effective.
Okay, thank you, doctor. So now that we know what antimicrobial resistance is and why it's a concern, how do our farmers, or how could our farmers possibly be contributing to antimicrobial resistance without realizing it?
Okay, so generally, or the biggest cause of antimicrobial resistance, or what drives antimicrobial resistance, is the misuse and the overuse of antibiotics. So those examples would be like when you administer or you give an animal an antibiotic when it's not necessary. For example, when you treat an infection that is caused by a virus and not by a bacteria. For example, if you have ORF in your goats and you give an antibiotic, that is, it's not indicated for that purpose, so you are not using it for the right purposes. Other examples would be like when you administer antibiotics to healthy animals. Say your farmer is having cases of animals dying and you are scared, and you administer or you give all your animals on your farm antibiotics. So those are drivers of antibiotic resistance, and our farmers are doing so unknowingly. Other contributing factors would be, say a veterinarian prescribes antibiotics for you to use it. They have confirmed that yes, indeed the infection is caused by a bacteria. They prescribe an antibiotic, and the farmer does not adhere to the instructions. We often find ourselves underdosing. We give less of what we are supposed to give to the animal. That is a big contributing factor. Another thing is the withdrawal period. So as much as the instructions are clear on our medicines that we use, and that does not only go for antibiotics, but also for our vaccines. When we administer it to the animals, we are not adhering to withdrawal periods. These are all contributing factors to antimicrobial resistance. That is just to mention a few.
Okay, you put us through a lot of very good points regarding how our farmers are unknowingly driving antimicrobial resistance. But I just want to go back to your previous point on withdrawal periods. Could you just kindly elaborate on withdrawal periods and what they are and why it is important that we need to adhere, or at least our farmers need to adhere to them?
Okay, so withdrawal periods are basically the time period that an animal's body needs for it to metabolize and eliminate a specific medicine or product from its body. So you do not want it to stay in there forever. And this is very important when it comes to our food producing animals. So the animals from which we will eventually consume their products, as it's the general public, when we do not adhere to this withdrawal period to allow for the medicines to be eliminated from the body of the animal, we as the public or the consumers are at a risk of consuming these residues. We call it residues. So this is what is left over of the medicines in the body. So we are consuming what was not intended to be in our bodies at the end of the day, if that makes sense, because we administered it to do its job in the animal's body, and that is where it's supposed to end.
Wow, that is actually very interesting. So if our farmers are not adhering to withdrawal periods once they administer antibiotics or other medications to their animals, we might actually be ingesting veterinary-based medications into our system through the meat or the milk that we drink from our animals, and that could be a very serious health risk. So thank you so much for taking us through that. I just want to go back to your point about, how antimicrobial resistance can be driven by farmers unknowingly administering antibiotics in cases where the animal might possibly have another type of infection. For example, one that's caused by a virus. I think you spoke of ORF in goats. So how could our farmers go about it better if they have a sick animal and they want to cure the animal?
Right. Okay, so the first thing for a farmer to do when they do have a sick animal or sick animals on their farm would be to isolate these animals. The first thing you want to do is separate these animals from the healthy ones or the ones that seem to be healthy, and after that consult a veterinarian. That is the best practice. Even after you do that, and after consultation with the veterinarian, it would be advisable to stick to the instructions provided by the veterinarian. Do not, in any circumstances, grab your antibiotic and start administering it to animals when it has not been confirmed that this illness or this sickness has indeed been caused by bacteria. So if there is any suspicion as to why it's not a bacteria, and for whatever reason you could not consult a veterinarian, which would be the ideal practice, rather refrain from administering the antibiotic. And why it's also important to refer to a veterinarian in this regard would be the vet might have to confirm which specific bacteria we are dealing with. What bacteria is actually causing the illness or the sickness on this farm, and they might have to send samples to a laboratory like the Central Veterinary Laboratory to confirm what bacteria it is, and also just to find out which antibiotic would specifically work for that bacteria, because not all antibiotics work for all bacteria. You can't do blanket treatment for all disease cases that you are having on your farm. That would be one. This would not only shorten the treatment plan, it would make it more effective, it will make it more cost effective. If you know right away what you're dealing with, how you are treating these sick animals, in the long run it will be saving the farmer money, and it will also then shorten the period for which the animals are sick, and then it could ultimately increase productivity.
Oh, that's great. Farmers, I myself even like to hear about the benefits. So when we're speaking of benefits, it's good when you're encouraging someone to do the right thing to outline exactly what they would gain or what they stand to gain from doing exactly that. And I think you highlighted some of the benefits of farmers contributing to this fight against antimicrobial resistance. So in that regard, Doctor, I would just like to know, what other do's and don'ts would you like to advise farmers on, apart from using antibiotics prudently after consulting with a veterinarian in this case? What else on a farm could farmers adhere to in order to prevent the drive of antimicrobial resistance in Namibia?
Okay. So I've mentioned a few, but just to add on to that again and to emphasize, I would mention again to adhere to how much of an antibiotic you are supposed to administer to an animal. That is very important. Apart from that, it's completing the course. So when a veterinarian prescribes a certain antibiotic to animals, it is very important to adhere to the time period that was prescribed. If it was advised to use it for 5 days, this is very important to stick to those 5 days or to complete the course, even if the animal looks healthy. They might look healthy, but it is still very important to complete the course. Other things to look at would be, how do you handle these antibiotics and also your vaccines? How do you handle them? How do you store them? So you would want to store them in a refrigerated area or in a cold space, away from direct heat or sunlight. And also, when you have some left over, you do not keep it for future use. It's very important for antibiotics, when you have used the quantity and for the time period that you were supposed to use it for, once it's done, you discard what is left. You do not borrow some to or from your neighbors, because what they are dealing with might not be what you dealt with on your farm. And another thing would also be just to look at, how do you dispose of, how do you get rid of all the leftover medicines or antibiotics that you have on the farm, whether it's what was remaining from the past or what is expired. How do you get rid of this? People tend to just dump it in down the drain, flush it down a toilet or into a water system, and that is not the ideal way of doing that. The best practice would be to keep all your unused or your expired medicines, keep it in a safe place, in a plastic container, preferably removed from their original package. And when you do visit a local state veterinary office or pharmacy, they are very welcoming to discard or to dispose of the medicines for you in a correct manner. So you do not have to take charge of that. If you cannot find yourself at a state veterinary office or at a pharmacy anytime, like in the near future, you keep it in a safe place on your farm. Again, make sure it does not end up in water systems or in the environment. And perhaps when veterinary services do come, say for a farm inspection or for any other reason, then you could still give it to a veterinary official to dispose it off for you. So those are just a few things that I think I can mention for now.
Yes, I think, Doctor, you touched on a very, very important point about disposing of our antibiotics and other medications. And I think this also applies to us when we use antibiotics or other medications as humans. It's not just for the animal medications. It is important to adhere to disposing or throwing away of your medications in the right way, because like Doctor said, if you were to, for example, flush your medications down the toilet, they do end up in our water systems, and if we have contaminated water systems, of course this is coming back into our bodies, and resistance is then also going to be driven in humans. So it's important to also establish that link, that we're not only protecting our animals in this way, but we're protecting ourselves as well, we're protecting our future generations, and we're protecting our environment in the grand scheme of things. So thank you so much for this point, Doctor. Do you have any last pieces of advice to our farmers as we wrap up?
Yeah, maybe just to refer to the long-term benefit of doing something about AMR. I mean, like how you just spoke about the One Health, how we all integrated. So what we put into our animals ultimately ends up within us. What we put into our animals or into ourselves, it ends up in our environment, and so the cycle goes on. So with us doing something about AMR, we can then also ensure it plays a part in a very important role in food security in the future, because like we spoke about the resistant pathogens that can end up in our animals. We spoke about the withdrawal periods, all of that. This all contributes to food security. Yeah. But not only that, when we do make sure that we conserve what we have at the moment. The medicines that we currently do have, our antibiotics that we currently have, we are, how do I put it, effectively treating the problems that we're having in a shorter time period. So your animals, the chances of them getting sick is less. Also, for prevention measures, I would maybe just also emphasize where this is where biosecurity measures on your farm plays a very important part. Also, good hygiene practices, keeping everything clean, your hands, animal housing, the equipment on the farm, all of that. So, and in the future, when you prevent your animals from getting sick or having these losses, then ultimately at the end you are saving money as a farmer. You are increasing your outputs, because an animal that is less sick or healthier has a bigger output. They produce more at the end of the day. So the farmer benefits, the animal benefits, and then at the end of the day the environment benefits from it. Yeah.
Yes, I think you definitely have taken us through exactly why we need to continue this fight against antimicrobial resistance, so that we can preserve ourselves, protect our animals and the environment. And I think another key thing to take away as we're wrapping up is that ultimately prevention is better than cure. Doctor talked about biosecurity measures, and what this basically means is that it's important as farmers that when we're handling our animals, that we are doing so in a very hygienic way, that we're making sure we wash our hands, using gloves, using the correct equipment, making sure our equipment are clean as well. All these small things go a long way, because ultimately if you can prevent your animals from getting these dangerous infections, then you're also going to be preventing the spread of antimicrobial resistance in a very active and proactive way. So I think this is one of the things that we really need to take away from this. But Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for all the insights that you've shared. I'm sure our farmers feel more educated on exactly what antimicrobial resistance is and how they can contribute to this fight against antimicrobial resistance. Remember, it's not only a fight that Namibia is in alone. This is a global fight, and it has become a global health crisis. Again, it's not only for our animals, it's for ourselves as well. So some of these tips that we've given you also apply to you when you're using your antimicrobials and other medications. Thank you so much, Doctor, and thank you for joining us. We will see you in our next segment.